Greg was not your typical tourist. He wasn't the kind of guy who stuck to carefully planned itineraries or spent hours researching the best spots for photos. Instead, he thrived on spontaneity and adventure, always chasing experiences that felt real and unfiltered. So, when he landed in London with his trusty companion, Max, a stocky, wrinkly-faced English bulldog with a personality larger than life, Greg knew this trip would be unforgettable. Max wasn't just a pet. He was Greg's partner in crime. From long hikes in the countryside to lazy afternoons at the park, the duo did everything together. This time, their destination was Buckingham Palace, one of London's most iconic landmarks. Greg had heard all about the famous changing of the guard ceremony and wanted to see it up close. Plus, he figured Max would enjoy the excitement of being surrounded by so many people. Little did Greg know, Max had plans of his own. As they made their way through the bustling streets of London, Greg marveled at the city's charm, the historic buildings, the vibrant street performers, and the unmistakable hum of energy that filled the air. Tourists from around the world mingled with locals, creating a lively atmosphere that was infectious. Max trotted happily beside Greg, his stubby legs moving with surprising speed as he sniffed every interesting scent along the way. The bulldog's squishy face wore an expression of pure curiosity, his wide eyes scanning the scene like a detective searching for clues. When they finally arrived at Buckingham Palace, the grandeur of the building took Greg's breath away. Its golden gates gleamed under the sunlight, and the perfectly manicured gardens stretched out like a lush green carpet. A large crowd had already gathered near the entrance, eagerly waiting for the guards to appear. Greg found a spot near the front, careful to keep Max close by. The bulldog sat obediently at first, tilting his head as if trying to understand why everyone seemed so excited. But Max wasn't content to sit quietly for long. His ears perked up as the sound of drums echoed in the distance, signaling the approach of the guards. The rhythmic beat grew louder, drawing cheers from the crowd. Max barked once, clearly intrigued by the noise. Greg laughed and scratched behind Max's ears, whispering, "Easy, buddy. Just enjoy the show." Despite Greg's reassurances, Max couldn't contain his enthusiasm. The combination of the music, the cheering crowd, and the anticipation in the air proved too much for the excitable bulldog. He started tugging at his leash, his little body wriggling with pent-up energy. Greg tightened his grip, but Max was determined. His gaze locked onto something, or someone, in the distance. It was then that Greg noticed the towering figure of a royal guard standing nearby, clad in a striking red coat and a towering bearskin hat. To Max, the guard looked less like a symbol of tradition and more like a giant stuffed toy begging to be played with. The moment Max spotted the guard, his tail began wagging furiously. Greg could feel the tension in the leash growing stronger. "No, Max," he said firmly, trying to rein him in. But sometimes, even the best intentions aren't enough to stop a bulldog on a mission. And as fate would have it, Max's next move would leave everyone, including Greg, completely speechless. The unexpected bond between Max and the guard didn't end with a simple pat on the head. In fact, it only grew stronger in those fleeting moments, leaving an indelible impression not just on Greg and the crowd, but also on the guard himself. As the bulldog wagged his tail furiously, clearly overjoyed by the attention, the guard surprised everyone yet again, this time with a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't a wide grin or anything that would break protocol outright, but it was enough to soften the stern lines of his face. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, betraying a warmth that no amount of training could suppress. He leaned down just a little further and whispered something under his breath. No one in the crowd could hear exactly what he said, but whatever it was made Max tilt his head in that adorable way bulldogs do when they're trying to understand something. It was as though the two had formed their own private language, transcending the barriers of species and tradition. Greg watched in awe, his earlier panic melting into pure admiration. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. This towering figure, who had seemed so untouchable and distant just moments ago, now appeared almost approachable, a reminder that even the most disciplined individuals have a heart beneath their uniform. The guard's gentle demeanor toward Max revealed a side of humanity that resonated deeply with everyone present. As the applause from the crowd continued, some people began cheering louder, urging the guard to keep interacting with Max. "Go on, give him another pat," someone shouted, sparking laughter among the onlookers. Others chimed in with playful remarks like, "Looks like the Bulldogs won you over," or "Who's guarding who now?" The mood was light, joyful, and full of shared delight. Even the other guards standing nearby seemed to relax ever so slightly, their rigid postures softening as they exchanged subtle glances with one another. For Max, this newfound friendship was everything he could have hoped for. He barked happily once more, his stubby tail wagging so hard it looked like it might take off. Then, as if sensing the gravity of the situation, or perhaps realizing his leash was still firmly in Greg's hand, he sat down obediently in front of the guard, offering what can only be described as a doggy bow. It was a gesture of respect, albeit clumsy and utterly charming, that drew another round of cheers from the crowd. The guard responded with a final, gentle stroke on Max's back before standing upright once more. Though his expression returned to its usual stoic demeanor, there was a lingering softness in his eyes that spoke volumes. Without uttering a single audible word, he had conveyed kindness, patience, and understanding, all qualities that left a lasting impact on everyone who witnessed the exchange. Meanwhile, Greg finally found his voice. "Thank you," he said sincerely, looking up at the guard. His tone carried both gratitude and humility, acknowledging the extraordinary moment they had all shared. The guard gave a slight nod in response, a silent acknowledgement that communicated more than words ever could. As the ceremony resumed and the music swelled, the crowd gradually shifted its focus back to the marching guards. But the memory of what had just transpired lingered in the air, wrapping everyone in a sense of warmth and connection. For many, it served as a powerful reminder that even in structured, formal settings, moments of genuine humanity can shine through. And for Greg, it reinforced the idea that sometimes life's most unforgettable experiences come from the smallest, most unexpected interactions, like a bulldog befriending a royal guard. Max's mischievous streak was about to take center stage, and no one, not even Greg, was prepared for what happened next. The bulldog's eyes sparkled with determination as he zeroed in on the towering figure of the royal guard. To Max, the guard wasn't just another human in an elaborate uniform. He was a fascinating mystery wrapped in red fabric and topped with a fluffy black hat that looked suspiciously like a chew toy. Every instinct in Max's body told him to investigate further. Greg tried his best to hold onto the leash, but Max had other plans. With a sudden burst of energy, the bulldog lunged forward, yanking the leash out of Greg's hand. For a split second, Greg froze, his brain struggling to process what was happening. Then reality hit him like a freight train. "Max," he shouted, his voice tinged with panic as he watched his dog charge toward the unsuspecting guard. The crowd gasped collectively, their attention shifting from the approaching guards to the tiny bulldog barreling through the sea of legs. Some people laughed nervously, unsure if this was part of some hidden performance or prank. Others whipped out their phones, eager to capture the chaos unfolding before them. Parents hoisted their children onto shoulders for a better view, while friends exchanged wide-eyed glances, whispering excitedly about the unexpected turn of events. Meanwhile, Max didn't seem to notice or care about the commotion he was causing. His stubby legs carried him straight to the base of the guard's boots, where he stopped momentarily to sniff. Satisfied with his initial investigation, Max stood up on his hind legs, placing his paws against the guard's shins. He barked loudly, his deep voice echoing like a tiny foghorn. It was as though he was demanding the guard's full attention, refusing to be ignored. The guard, true to his training, remained utterly motionless. His face was a mask of stoic professionalism, betraying no hint of emotion despite the bulldog's antics. But inside, the guard couldn't help but feel a flicker of amusement, and maybe even a touch of admiration, for the fearless little creature attempting to commandeer the spotlight. Still, protocol dictated that he maintain his rigid stance, no matter how unusual the situation became. Greg, meanwhile, was sprinting through the crowd, muttering apologies as he shoved past bewildered tourists. "I'm so sorry," he called out repeatedly, his cheeks burning with embarrassment. His heart raced as he imagined the potential consequences of Max's actions. Would security intervene? Would they ban him from the palace grounds? Or worse, would the guard somehow retaliate against his disobedient dog? As Greg finally reached the scene, he found himself face to face with a surreal sight. Max was now circling the guard, tail wagging furiously as if trying to coax the towering figure into a game of chase. The bulldog's playful barks filled the air, contrasting sharply with the solemn atmosphere of the changing of the guard ceremony. Despite the tension, it was impossible not to smile at the absurdity of it all. The crowd, too, seemed torn between amusement and concern. A few brave souls stepped closer, snapping photos and videos as though witnessing a once-in-a-lifetime event, which in many ways they were. Children giggled uncontrollably, pointing at Max as if he were the star of a cartoon come to life. Even some of the other guards, standing nearby, appeared to struggle to suppress grins beneath their stern expressions. For Greg, the moment felt endless. Time slowed down as he bent down to grab Max's leash, hoping to pull his dog away before things escalated further. But just as he reached for it, something extraordinary happened, something that would leave everyone, including Greg, completely speechless. The private event hosted by the British Army turned out to be far more meaningful than Greg could have imagined. Held in a grand hall adorned with flags, medals, and photographs of service members through the years, the gathering brought together soldiers, their families, and a handful of honored guests, including Greg and Max. As they stepped inside, Greg felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He wasn't sure what to expect, but one thing was certain: Max was already stealing the show. Dressed in his royal blue bandana, Max waddled confidently into the room, drawing smiles from everyone he passed. Children crouched down to pet him, giggling as he licked their hands or plopped onto his belly for belly rubs. Adults approached Greg to shake his hand, thanking him for sharing such a heartwarming story with the world. One elderly woman even teared up as she recounted how the video of Max and the guard had brightened her day during a tough time. "It reminded me that there's still goodness in the world," she said softly, patting Max on the head. But the highlight of the evening came when Greg finally reunited with the guard who had started it all. Without his towering bearskin hat and formal uniform, the guard looked surprisingly approachable, though no less impressive. His name was James, and as they shook hands, Greg immediately sensed a shared warmth and mutual respect. They sat down together at a table near the back of the hall, with Max sprawled contentedly at their feet, and began chatting like old friends. James confessed that the moment with Max had stayed with him long after the ceremony ended. "You don't always get the chance to connect like that," he admitted with a small smile. "We're trained to stay focused, to block out distractions. But sometimes, breaking protocol, even just a little, can remind you why we do what we do. It's about protecting people, yes, but also connecting with them." He paused, glancing fondly at Max. "And let's face it, it's hard not to love a bulldog." Greg nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude toward James. "I can't thank you enough for handling everything so gracefully," he said sincerely. "Honestly, I thought we might get into trouble. Instead, you turned a chaotic situation into something unforgettable. For us, and for everyone watching." Their conversation flowed effortlessly, revealing surprising similarities between them. Both were passionate about animals. James revealed he had grown up with a bulldog named Winston, who had been his constant companion throughout childhood. When Greg joked that Max seemed to think he was part of the royal guard now, James laughed and handed over a small gift, a plush toy shaped like a bearskin hat, specially made for Max. Something to remember us by, he said with a wink. As the night wore on, Greg found himself reflecting on the deeper meaning of the evening. This wasn't just an acknowledgement of a viral moment. It was a celebration of humanity, connection, and the bridges that could be built across cultures and traditions. The soldiers and their families welcomed Greg and Max with open arms, treating them not as outsiders but as part of their community. It was humbling and inspiring, a reminder that kindness transcends boundaries. By the end of the event, Greg realized that this experience had changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Before coming to London, he had seen the city as a destination for adventure and exploration. Now, he understood it as a place where unexpected friendships could blossom, in the most unlikely settings. As he left the hall with Max trotting happily beside him, Greg knew he'd carry these memories forever. And though the spotlight would eventually fade, the lessons learned and the bonds formed would remain etched in his heart, proving once again that life's greatest treasures often come from moments you never see coming. As Greg finally managed to grab hold of Max's leash, the tension in the air was almost tangible. The crowd had gone eerily quiet for a brief moment, as if everyone collectively held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. But then, something remarkable unfolded, something no one could have predicted. The guard, who had been standing tall and motionless despite Max's playful advances, began to shift ever so slightly. His movements were subtle at first, almost imperceptible. He lowered his chin just a fraction, his eyes narrowing slightly as he glanced down at the Bulldog tugging at his boots. For a split second, it seemed like he might remain frozen in place, adhering strictly to protocol. After all, Royal Guards were trained to ignore distractions, whether they came in the form of loud noises, unruly tourists, or even mischievous dogs. But then, something unexpected happened. Slowly, deliberately, the guard crouched down until he was eye level with Max. His gloved hand moved cautiously toward the Bulldog, stopping just inches away from Max's squishy face. The crowd erupted into murmurs of disbelief. Was this really happening? Was a Royal Guard breaking protocol to interact with the dog? Max, sensing the change in energy, immediately stopped barking. His tail wagged furiously, and he tilted his head in that endearing way bulldogs do when they're confused but curious. It was as though he recognized the guard's gesture as an invitation, a chance to make a new friend. Without hesitation, Max leaned forward, nudging the guard's hand with his wet nose. The guard responded by gently patting Max on the head, his gloved fingers brushing against the Bulldog's soft fur. The crowd, which had been buzzing with nervous energy just moments ago, now exploded into applause. Cheers rang out, and people clapped enthusiastically, clearly delighted by the heartwarming exchange. Some even whistled or shouted words of encouragement, while others laughed in sheer amazement. Parents lifted their children higher, ensuring they didn't miss a single second of the magical moment. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, and smiles spread across faces young and old. Greg stood there, completely dumbfounded. He hadn't expected anything like this. In fact, he'd been bracing himself for the worst-case scenario: angry guards, security intervention, or maybe even being escorted off the premises. Instead, here was one of the most disciplined figures in British tradition, bending the rules to connect with his dog. It was surreal, touching, and utterly unforgettable. For the guard, it was clear that this decision wasn't made lightly. Every movement he made was calculated, respectful, and imbued with a quiet kindness. Despite his imposing uniform and rigid training, he revealed a softer side, a reminder that beneath the ceremonial exterior lay a human being capable of compassion and empathy. The interaction lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity to those watching. Finally, the guard rose back to his full height, resuming his stoic posture as if nothing unusual had occurred. Yet the atmosphere around him had changed entirely. The once tense scene was now filled with warmth and joy, thanks to a simple act of connection between man and dog. Greg, still holding onto Max's leash, took a step back, unsure of what to say or do next. His mind raced with thoughts of gratitude, relief, and awe. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the moment passed. The ceremony resumed, the music played on, and the guards continued their march. But for everyone present, especially Greg and Max, the experience left an indelible mark. What started as a chaotic mishap had transformed into something far greater, a testament to the power of kindness, even in the most unexpected places. The heartwarming moment between Max and the Royal Guard might have ended, but its ripple effects were just beginning to unfold. As Greg led his now famous Bulldog away from the scene, he couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: relief that everything had turned out okay, pride in Max's undeniable charm, and amazement at how such a chaotic situation had transformed into something so special. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. Tourists who had captured videos on their phones wasted no time uploading them to social media platforms. Within hours, clips of Max lunging toward the guard, wagging his tail, and receiving a gentle pat went viral. The hashtag Bulldog meets Guard began trending worldwide, with people sharing memes, jokes, and heartfelt comments about the unlikely friendship. Some even photoshopped images of Max wearing a tiny bearskin hat, turning him into an internet sensation overnight. Back at their hotel room, Greg scrolled through his phone, astonished by the sheer volume of messages flooding in. Friends, family, and even strangers praised him for bringing a bit of joy to the world. One comment stood out: "In a time when we're all looking for connection, this reminded us that kindness can bridge any gap, even between a Bulldog and a Royal Guard." It was a sentiment echoed by countless others, and it made Greg realize just how much impact a single moment could have. But the story didn't stop there. The next morning, as Greg sipped his coffee while scrolling through news articles, he came across a headline that caught his breath: "Tourists' Bulldog wins hearts at Buckingham Palace." Major outlets had picked up the story, recounting every detail, from Max's playful antics to the guard's unexpected display of compassion. What surprised Greg most, however, was the overwhelming positivity surrounding the event. Instead of criticism or outrage, people celebrated the humanity behind the ceremonial uniform and applauded the guard's ability to adapt to such an unusual situation. Later that day, Greg received an email that left him speechless. It was from the British Army, inviting him and Max to attend a private event honoring service members and their families. The message read, "Your visit has highlighted the importance of connection and goodwill, values we hold dear. We would be honored to welcome you and your remarkable companion." Greg couldn't believe it. Not only had they avoided trouble, but they were being recognized for spreading joy. He immediately accepted the invitation, eager to meet the guard again and express his gratitude properly. When the day of the event arrived, Greg dressed Max in his finest collar, a royal blue bandana embroidered with paw prints, and together they headed to the venue. At the gathering, Greg was introduced to the very same guard who had won over the crowd's hearts. Up close, without the towering hat and formal uniform, the guard seemed more approachable yet equally impressive. They exchanged stories, discovering they had more in common than either had expected. The guard revealed that he too owned a Bulldog back home, explaining why he'd been so understanding during the encounter. "They're loyal, loving creatures," he said with a fond smile. "Hard not to adore them." Max, true to form, plopped himself down at the guard's feet, gazing up at him adoringly. The guard chuckled and reached down to give Max another affectionate pat, cementing their newfound bond. For Greg, it was a surreal experience, one that reinforced the idea that connections can form in the most unexpected ways. By the end of the evening, Greg knew this trip would stay with him forever. More than the landmarks or souvenirs, it was the relationships forged and the lessons learned that mattered most. And as he walked away with Max trotting happily beside him, he couldn't help but smile, knowing they'd left London with far more than memories. They'd left with a story worth telling for generations. The viral fame that followed Max and Greg's encounter at Buckingham Palace was nothing short of extraordinary. What started as a spontaneous, chaotic moment quickly snowballed into a global phenomenon, captivating hearts across continents. Social media feeds were flooded with videos of Max bounding toward the guard, his tail wagging furiously, and the guard's unexpected display of kindness. Memes popped up everywhere, some showing Max wearing a tiny bearskin hat, others depicting him standing proudly alongside the guards as if he'd been promoted to honorary duty. The internet couldn't get enough. News outlets picked up the story, turning it into a feel-good headline amid often heavy current events. Bulldog breaks protocol, wins hearts, read one article. Another declared, Max the Magnificent, how a dog brought humanity to tradition. Even late-night talk show hosts joked about the incident, playfully speculating whether Max might be invited to join the Royal Guard full-time. For Greg, who had always lived a relatively low-key life, the sudden attention was overwhelming, but undeniably heartwarming. People from all walks of life chimed in, sharing their thoughts on what made the moment so special. Some praised the guard's restraint and warmth, calling it a testament to the humanity behind ceremonial roles. Others focused on Max, marveling at how his playful antics had brought joy to thousands. Animal lovers, in particular, rallied around the Bulldog, hailing him as a hero for reminding everyone of the universal language of kindness. One commenter wrote, "This is exactly what we need more of in the world, a reminder that even in rigid structures, there's room for connection." As days passed, Greg found himself fielding interview requests from newspapers, podcasts, and TV shows. While he initially hesitated, unsure of how much attention he wanted, he eventually agreed to a few interviews. Each time, he emphasized that the real star of the story wasn't him, it was Max. "He's just being himself," Greg would say with a laugh. "If anything, I think people are responding to the idea that sometimes breaking rules, or bending them a little, can lead to something beautiful." Max, for his part, seemed completely unfazed by his newfound celebrity status. He continued to nap in sunbeams, chase squirrels in the park, and demand belly rubs like any other bulldog. But there were subtle changes, too. Strangers stopped Greg on the street to ask if they could pet Max or take a photo with him. Local businesses began offering free treats or discounts in exchange for a visit from the famous pup. One cafe even created a special drink called the Max Mocha, complete with whipped cream shaped like a paw print. Despite the whirlwind of attention, Greg remained grounded. He knew this level of fame wouldn't last forever. And truthfully, he didn't want it to. What mattered most to him was the message behind the story. That moments of genuine connection, no matter how small, can leave a lasting impact. Whether it was a guard showing compassion to a dog or a crowd coming together to celebrate an unplanned act of joy, these were the things that truly resonated. One morning, while scrolling through social media, Greg stumbled upon a comment that stuck with him. A teacher had shared the video of Max and the guard with her students, using it as a lesson about empathy and understanding. Even when someone, or something, disrupts your plans, she told her class, you can choose to respond with patience and kindness. That's how we make the world a better place. Reading those words, Greg felt a swell of pride, not because his dog was famous, but because their story had inspired others to see the good in everyday interactions. By the time the buzz began to die down, Greg realized something important. Fame wasn't the point. It was the connections they'd made, the laughter they'd sparked, the conversations they'd ignited, that truly mattered. And as he watched Max snore softly on the couch, oblivious to his brief stint as a global sensation, Greg knew they'd taken away far more than memories from their trip to London. They'd discovered the power of simple, unscripted moments to bring people together. And that was a lesson worth holding on to for a lifetime. The whirlwind of events surrounding Max's encounter with the Royal Guard left a lasting impression on everyone involved, especially Greg. As he and Max boarded their flight back home, Greg couldn't help but reflect on how much their lives had changed in such a short time. What began as an ordinary trip to London had transformed into an extraordinary journey filled with laughter, connection, and lessons neither of them would soon forget. For Greg, one of the biggest takeaways was the importance of embracing spontaneity. He had always prided himself on being open to adventure, but this experience taught him that sometimes the best moments are the ones you never planned for. Whether it was Max breaking free from his leash or James bending protocol to pat the Bulldog, those unscripted seconds reminded Greg that life's magic often lies in its unpredictability. You can't control everything, he mused to himself as the plane soared above the clouds. Sometimes, you just have to let things unfold and trust they'll turn out okay. Max, too, seemed different, though perhaps only Greg noticed the subtle changes. The Bulldog still snored loudly at night, chased after squirrels in the park, and demanded belly rubs like clockwork. But there was a new confidence in his stride, a certain swagger that hadn't been there before. Greg liked to joke that Max now carried himself like a true celebrity, pausing dramatically whenever someone asked to take his picture. And while Max might not have understood the fuss, Greg knew his dog had touched countless lives simply by being himself, a reminder that authenticity has its own kind of power. But the impact went beyond Greg and Max. Back in London, James found himself thinking about the incident often. It wasn't just the memory of Max's wagging tail or playful barks that stayed with him. It was the way the moment had resonated with others. Strangers continued to approach him during ceremonies, mentioning how much they appreciated seeing a guard show kindness to a dog. Some even thanked him for reminding them that behind every uniform is a person capable of compassion. For James, it reinforced why he chose this line of work, not just to uphold tradition, but to connect with people. And yes, even dogs, in meaningful ways. The public response also highlighted something bigger: humanity's shared longing for connection. In a world often divided by differences, Max and James's brief interaction served as a unifying force. People from all corners of the globe came together online to celebrate the moment, sharing stories of their own pets or discussing the value of empathy. Teachers used the story to teach children about patience and understanding, while families gathered around screens to watch videos of Max's antics together. It was proof that small acts of kindness could ripple outward, creating waves of positivity far beyond what anyone might expect. As weeks turned into months, Greg made sure to keep the spirit of their adventure alive. He framed a photo of Max sitting proudly beside James, placing it prominently on his living room wall. He also started volunteering at a local animal shelter, inspired by how much joy Max had brought to so many people. Every dog deserves a chance to shine, he told friends when they asked why he'd taken up the cause. Deep down, he knew he owed it to Max, to honor the happiness his furry companion had spread. And then there was Max's plush bearskin hat, which became a cherished keepsake. Whenever Greg placed it gently on Max's head, the Bulldog would tilt it slightly, looking both adorable and dignified. Friends who visited couldn't resist snapping photos, ensuring that Max's legacy as the Bulldog who befriended royalty lived on. Looking back, Greg realized the entire experience had taught him something profound. Life is full of unexpected twists, but those twists often lead to the most beautiful destinations. From the chaos of a runaway bulldog to the warmth of a global community celebrating connection, it was a reminder that even the smallest actions, like a guard crouching to pet a dog, could leave an indelible mark on the world. As Greg tucked Max into bed that night, he smiled, knowing their lives were richer because of what had happened. They hadn't set out to change the world, but in their own quirky, unplanned way they had. And as Max drifted off to sleep, his stubby legs twitching in dreams of chasing squirrels, or maybe guards, Greg whispered softly, "Good night, my little hero."